Welcome to session 6 of Coping with COVID-19 series for parents. I am Gerry Vassar, President, CEO of Lakeside.
Hello, I'm Diane Wagenhals. I'm the Program Director for Lakeside Global Institute.
Diane, in our last session, we actually talked about discipline.
Yes.
And you gave us a perspective and a philosophy and a way to think about it and trying to help parents be very confident, very calm, very clear in how they discipline their kids when they see behavior that's not appropriate. What's interesting for some of us, depending on our own background, is the rules. Mm-hmm. What are the right rules? I, as a product from the southern part of our country, respect was like one of the only rules. You couldn't lie, but you had to have respect. Or it was really, if it wasn't yes ma'am, yes sir, that was a big rule. I'm not sure how great a rule that was for everything in life, but we as a family set our own rules. And sometimes they're legacies, and sometimes they're societal, and sometimes they're only to our family. What's a good guideline, or what's a good way to think about what rules are healthy and right for a family to function in a relationally and emotionally healthy way?
Good question. And I think when I said in the last session about being calm, clear, and confident, the clear part has to do with what are the rules. Mm-hmm. If kids don't know what the rules are in the family and they don't know what's expected of them, then it's like they're arbitrary lines. If they cross, then they're in trouble. But when there's been clarity around rules, even though kids are bound to break them because they're kids, it still gives them that sense of this is what's expected of me. Mm-hmm. And so parents, if you can call to the rules that you've talked to your kids about, then it's a fair way to parent them. So the question then is, so what are some good rules? One of the books that I really like a lot, it's an older book, but it's called The Family Virtues Guide. And it's Simple Ways to Bring Out the Best in Our Children and Ourselves by Linda, her last name is Popov, P-O-P-O-V. And she has in here the whole philosophy that you parent based on your values, on the things that you think are important, the virtues that you want your children to be raised experiencing and hopefully adopting. And so she talks about some guidelines for establishing them. And the first thing is for you as a parent to choose, what are your virtues? What things are, and you just said respect, and that's a key one for most parents, is that they want kids who understand what respect is all about. And you have to teach kids what respect means and why it is important and why it is a family virtue. So once you sit down and say, well, what are the virtues in our family that we want to espouse, that we want our kids to know this is the support system that the parents go to guide them in what it is they're doing. So she had a few that she said could be some examples. Peacefulness, is that a real virtue in your family? Cleanliness, respect, consideration, responsibility, those are just a few. And then when a child, if you've gone over what the virtues are as part of your ground rules, then you can base on that your statements to kids when they break one of those rules. So for example, for peacefulness, to say to a child, our home is a peace zone. We work out conflict by listening with compassion and talking with honesty. We use our voices, not our hands. We never use weapons. So when a child breaks the rule, to say, here's an example of how not to do it. It's always, I think, helpful to see the other side. If you hit the other child, you will be grounded for a week. By the way, grounding is one of the things that tends to punish you and the child, but it really punishes you. Anytime you ground a kid for any long period of time, it often ends up a disaster. So that's one thing, that's kind of an aside. But here is the relevant example that the author says. If you forget to be peaceful and hit another child, you must stop playing and take a time out. And I would take it even I would take a different tack to that. One of the things with grounding, instead of grounding with you setting the time, you can say to a child, you must make amends. Once you've made amends to my satisfaction, and if you've hurt another child, to that child's satisfaction, then you're back on to having your privileges reinstated.
So there's a reinstatement of relationship
Yes.
in this process.
Yes, it's
Right.
about repairing relational damage. And by valuing relationships is one of the things you place value on. And teaching kids just how important our relationships are. There's so much that kids will benefit from having this idea that I'm a member of this tribe called my family, and we have relationships that are based on these virtues, and we have rules that help give us those boundaries more clearly.
So I'm hearing a family identity is really important
Yes.
to having a home that is, that we understand there are boundaries, there are rules, there are
Yeah.
things that you do
Yeah.
and don't do
Yeah.
in this family. And I also hear that there's room for parents to begin to say, well, what are important relational integrity issues for
Yes.
me? And what are those that are really, really important? And codifying that, presenting it to our children with clear definition
Yes.
and some boundaries in that. And then from then on, from a young age forward, you basically give that sense of this is who we are.
Yeah.
We are this, we are this, we
It's
are
your
this, we
identity.
were this, we are this as identity, and this is what our family's about. And combined with good disciplinary measures
Yes.
of saying we're not going to punish, but we're going to use everything we have to develop consequences to reinforce those values,
Yes.
we're establishing a home that's pretty stable,
Yes.
predictable.
Yes.
The children feel safe in those environments because the limits are clear. And then also when we're making decisions in those interesting teenage days, you begin to have an understanding that there's a backdrop to that.
Yes.
There's a whole background to these rules that they may, we know the job of teenagers is to rebel and to become independent, but they are clear about what this family is about. So they know where they are
Yeah.
in the process. So I think this whole idea of family virtues, family values becomes a very significant part. And I think that a lot of us don't think about that. We're just in the fray of dealing with conflict and emotions and issues.
Right.
And we need to back up and say, well, wait a minute, why are we doing this?
We need to be equipped to go into the situations that are bound to come up, feeling prepared,
Great.
having thought it through, and in those quieter times to sit with kids and talk it through with them as well. So that's where you can ask them what's important to them.
Right.
What do you think should be some virtues, some things about our family that would make you feel safe and everyone else in the family feel safe and feel respected? And so it becomes a wonderful teaching opportunity. By the way, posting them was a good idea too.
So on the refrigerator or
And
somewhere
let
on
the kids design it. Let the kids have, because then they can sort of call anybody else in the family to a virtue if it's seeming like,
Now, wait a minute, it doesn't apply to me as a parent, of course.
Really?
No,
Then we have to be respectful of
no.
our children. How about that? And they can say, that didn't feel respectful, and you can pause and go,
Yeah.
my child has a point.
Good point.
I need to make amends.
There you go. So the same thing that applies to children applies to parents.
Yep.
In building a relationship
I think so.
that is guided by our principles and values about our family.
Yeah.
Great points. Thanks, Diane, for giving us some insight into how to set our own family values. And we appreciate that. And we thank you for joining us for that session on family values and coping with COVID-19 for parents. Thanks so much for joining us.